Welcome to Alcott Stories, the home of love, betrayal, passion, and second chances. If you're new here, get ready for heart-wrenching romance, unexpected twists, and stories that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. And if you've been with us for a while, thank you for being part of this journey. Your love and support keep these stories alive. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode filled with love, heartbreak, and redemption. Now, here's a question for you. Would you give a second chance to someone who once broke your heart? Tell us in the comments. We can't wait to hear your thoughts. Let's dive into another unforgettable story. The Grand Night Mansion was a fortress of wealth and power, its towering glass windows reflecting the city lights like a dream. Inside, the world was bathed in opulence, marble floors so polished they gleamed like mirrors, chandeliers dripping in diamonds, and air that carried the scent of fresh roses and expensive cologne. But for Aisha, this was not a place of luxury. It was a place of endless labor. A beautiful brown-skinned young woman with deep, soulful eyes, Aisha had spent the entire day working tirelessly. From dawn till late evening, she had scrubbed floors, polished furniture, arranged fresh flowers, and ensured every inch of the massive mansion was spotless. Her feet ached, her hands were raw from scrubbing, but she did not complain. She never did. Tonight, however, exhaustion was winning. She had just finished cleaning Alexander Knight's private suite, her delicate fingers smoothing over the luxurious silk sheets of his bed. The bed was like something out of a dream, massive, soft, inviting. She sighed deeply, pressing a hand to her forehead. Just one moment, she told herself, just a few seconds to breathe. Her legs gave way before she could fight the temptation. She sat at the edge of the bed, her body surrendering to the warmth beneath her. The moment she rested her head against the plush pillows, her eyelids fluttered shut. The scent of crisp linen and expensive cologne surrounded her, lulling her into a peaceful slumber. She did not hear the low hum of an approaching car. She did not notice the heavy doors of the mansion swing open as the master of the house returned home. Alexander Knight strode in, his powerful presence filling the space. He had just finished a long business meeting, his suit perfectly tailored, his tie loosened just enough to signal exhaustion. He was a man of power, of control, someone who demanded perfection in every corner of his life. But tonight, something shattered his carefully constructed world. The moment he stepped into his bedroom, he froze. There, lying peacefully in the center of his bed, was Aisha. His breath hitched, his normally sharp blue eyes softened as they traveled over her sleeping form. The moonlight pouring in from the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated her caramel skin, casting a glow over her delicate features. Her long lashes rested gently against her cheeks, her lips slightly parted, soft and tempting. She looked so serene, so untouched by the cold world he ruled. Alexander had never truly noticed her before, not like this. She had always been there, working quietly in the background, a part of his house, but never a part of his world. And yet, in this moment, she was the only thing he could see. His heartbeat quickened. Slowly, as if afraid to disturb a fragile dream, he stepped closer. His eyes traced every detail. The gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair curled against the pillow, the small sigh that escaped her lips as she shifted in her sleep. Something in his chest tightened. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers hesitating inches away from her face. He wanted to touch her. He wanted to feel if she was real. But then Aisha stirred, her eyes fluttered open, hazy with sleep. For a moment, she didn't realize where she was, but then her gaze landed on him, and all the blood drained from her face. She bolted upright, panic flashing in her deep brown eyes. "Mr. Knight, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to—" Alexander lifted a hand, silencing her. His gaze held hers, piercing, unreadable. but there was something in his expression she had never seen before. "You fell asleep," he murmured. His voice was low, almost gentle. Aisha swallowed hard, her hands gripping the sheets as she prepared to bolt out of the room. "I was just cleaning, and I didn't mean to." "I know," he said. She blinked in surprise. His eyes softened, his usual cold exterior melting away. For the first time, he wasn't looking at her like an employee. He was looking at her like a woman. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, his voice almost tender. Aisha didn't know how to respond. She had expected anger, dismissal, but not this, not kindness. I shouldn't have," she whispered. "It was inappropriate." Alexander stepped closer and she held her breath. "You were tired," he said simply. "I should have noticed how hard you've been working." Her heart pounded. This was not the ruthless billionaire she knew. This was someone else, someone she didn't understand. "I should go," she murmured, sliding off the bed. But before she could take a step, Alexander gently caught her wrist. The touch was electric. She gasped softly, their eyes locking. His grip was firm but not forceful, his fingers warm against her skin. "You don't have to run, Aisha," he said, his voice a little rough, as if he was battling something within himself. Aisha's breath hitched. The air between them was charged, thick with something unnamed. She could feel it, the way his eyes traced her lips, the way his breathing had changed. I'm just a maid," she whispered. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Not to me." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She wanted to say something, anything, but before she could find the words, he released her wrist and took a step back. "Go rest, Aisha," he said finally. "You deserve it." She hesitated, searching his face, but the moment had passed and Alexander was once again the unreadable man of power. With a small nod, she turned and hurried out of the room, her heart hammering in her chest. As she disappeared down the hallway, Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. He had just broken his own rules, and for the first time in his life, he didn't care. The night was eerily quiet as Alexander Knight stepped into his grand mansion. His mind was still lost in the aftermath of an intense business meeting, numbers, stocks, and profit margins swirling in his thoughts like an endless storm. He loosened his tie, his jaw set in its usual hard expression. Another day, another victory. That was how he lived, cold, calculated, always focused on the next deal. But tonight, everything changed. As he entered his dimly lit bedroom, he instinctively reached for the light switch, but then he saw her. He froze. Aisha lay on his bed, her body curled slightly into the silk sheets. The silver moonlight streamed through the massive glass windows, casting a glow on her smooth caramel skin. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, her lips slightly parted as if she were lost in a dream. Strands of her dark hair lay across her cheek, and the softest sigh escaped her lips as she stirred. Alexander's breath hitched. For a long moment he simply stared. How had he never noticed her like this before? He had always known Aisha worked hard, that she was quiet and diligent, but until this moment, she had been just another part of his world, someone he took for granted like the walls of his mansion, always present but never truly seen. But now he couldn't look away. The sight of her there, innocent and untouched by the coldness of his world, sent a strange warmth through his chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling, one that made his fingers itch to reach for her, to trace the contours of her face, to see if her skin felt as soft as it looked. Without thinking, he stepped closer. His movements were slow, almost hesitant, an unusual thing for a man who never hesitated. The sound of his footsteps was nearly silent against the expensive rug as he approached the bed. He stood at the edge, gazing down at her, his sharp blue eyes filled with something dangerously close to tenderness. His hand moved before his mind could catch up. Gently, he reached out, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. His fingertips barely skimmed her skin, but the simple touch sent a spark through his veins. Aisha murmured in her sleep, shifting slightly, her lips parting further, as if she were whispering secrets to the night. Alexander swallowed hard. He had been with women before, stunning, powerful, confident women who threw themselves at him without hesitation, but none of them had ever made him feel like this. This wasn't lust. This wasn't possession. This was something deeper, something that made his entire world tilt on its axis. His heart pounded against his ribs, his breath uneven as he stared down at her sleeping form. God, what is this feeling? He wanted to protect her. He wanted to hold her. He wanted to claim her. But most of all, he wanted to be worthy of her. The realization struck him hard, a bolt of lightning in the dark. Alexander Knight, the ruthless, emotionless billionaire who had built an empire without ever needing love, had just fallen. And he had fallen hopelessly. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt vulnerable. Carefully, he stepped back, forcing himself to put distance between them. If he touched her again, if he let himself fall any further, he wouldn't be able to stop. Turning on his heel, he walked away, his heart still hammering in his chest. But as he reached the doorway, he couldn't help but look back one last time. Aisha was still there, lost in her dreams, oblivious to the fact that she had just turned the world of the most powerful man in the city upside down. Alexander clenched his fists. He didn't know what this was yet. He didn't know how to name it. But one thing was certain. He would never see her the same way again. Aisha stirred, her body shifting against the soft silk sheets as the first rays of the morning sun kissed her skin. She sighed, stretching slightly, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Then it hit her. Her eyes snapped open. Her heart stopped. This wasn't her bed. This wasn't even the small, cramped servant quarters where she usually rested for a few hours before another day of exhausting labor. This was his bed. Panic shot through her veins like fire as her gaze darted around the grand bedroom. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city skyline, and the rich scent of expensive cologne still lingered in the air. She had slept here, in Alexander Knight's bedroom. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she bolted upright, her hands clutching the sheets. "Oh my God," she whispered, horror flooding her system. "What have I done?" She scrambled off the bed, her bare feet barely making a sound against the soft carpet. Just as she turned to flee, a deep, smooth voice froze her in place. "You're awake." Her breath hitched. Slowly, terrified, she turned, and there he was. Alexander Knight stood near the window, dressed in a crisp white shirt, the top few buttons undone, revealing a hint of his toned chest. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he had run his fingers through it moments ago. The morning sunlight highlighted the sharp edges of his face, his defined jawline, the piercing blue eyes that were locked onto her. Aisha's knees felt weak. I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her voice shaking. "I didn't mean to. I was cleaning and I must have—" He held up a hand, stopping her frantic apologies. "It's okay, Aisha," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Her heart pounded. "Okay?" She had fallen asleep in his bed, broken every unspoken rule that separated her world from his, and he was saying it was okay. She looked down, shame burning her cheeks. "I shouldn't have—" "You were exhausted," he interrupted gently, stepping closer. Her breath caught as he approached, his tall, commanding figure somehow feeling less intimidating and more protective. There was something different in his eyes, not cold calculation, not indifference, but something softer, something she didn't recognize. Aisha bit her lip, her hands twisting in the hem of her dress. "I should leave." Alexander hesitated for a second before exhaling. "You don't have to." She froze. Slowly she lifted her gaze to meet his, searching his expression for sarcasm, for anger, for anything that made sense. But there was none, only warmth. "You work too hard," he murmured. "No one should be that exhausted." Aisha's breath shuddered. No one had ever cared before. No one had ever looked at her and noticed her struggles, but he had. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to shake her head. "I'm just a maid, sir. Not to me." His words made the air between them crackle. Aisha's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Her mind screamed at her to step back, to put distance between them, to remind him and herself that they were from two different worlds. But her heart whispered something else. From that day on, everything changed. Alexander began finding excuses to be near her. He lingered when she was cleaning, asking casual questions that soon became deeper. "Where are you from?" he asked one afternoon, watching her arrange fresh flowers in a vase. She hesitated before answering. "A small town. Nothing like this place." "Tell me about it." She blinked. No one had ever asked before. No one had ever cared to know. And so, cautiously, she did. Over time, her fear turned into something else, something warm and dangerous. Trust. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine as Aisha stepped onto the rooftop terrace of the night mansion. She hesitated at the entrance, her heart racing in her chest. The sight before her was breathtaking. A long table sat in the middle of the terrace, draped in white silk, with flickering candles casting a golden glow. The city skyline stretched out behind it, a sea of twinkling lights. A gentle breeze rustled the sheer curtains that framed the intimate setting, making it feel like something out of a dream. And standing there, waiting for her, was Alexander. Dressed in a sleek black suit, the top button of his shirt undone, he looked like a vision of power and elegance, but there was something different in his expression tonight, something softer, something raw. Aisha swallowed hard. "Come," he said, his voice like velvet. Slowly, she stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as he pulled out a chair for her. She sat down, still unsure why she was here, why he had done all of this. She was just a maid. But as Alexander poured her a glass of red wine, as he watched her with those piercing blue eyes, she knew, to him, she was something more. Throughout dinner, they talked in ways they never had before. He asked about her dreams, her fears. He listened when she spoke, his gaze never leaving hers. He told her about his own life, the loneliness of wealth, the emptiness that came with power. "I built everything," he murmured, swirling his wine in his glass. "But none of it means anything if I don't have something real." Aisha's breath caught. "And what is real to you, Alexander?" His lips twitched, a ghost of a smile playing there. "You," he whispered. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She tried to speak, to find the words to tell him this was dangerous, that their worlds were too different. But before she could, Alexander reached for her hand. His fingers were warm, strong, yet gentle as they enclosed hers. "I don't care about status or wealth. I don't care what the world thinks." His voice was barely above a whisper, his thumb tracing slow, feather-light circles on her skin. "I care about you." Aisha shivered. This couldn't be real. And yet, as he leaned in, as his breath fanned against her lips, as his hand slid up to cradle her cheek, she realized she wanted to believe it. Then he kissed her. It was slow, deliberate, a kiss that wasn't just about passion, but about claiming. About telling her, without words, that he had chosen her. The world around them blurred, the city lights melting into the background as his lips moved against hers. He deepened the kiss, his hands sliding around her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. She melted into him, her hands grasping the fabric of his shirt, needing to hold on to something, needing to convince herself this was real. When they broke apart, their breaths mingling, Alexander's eyes darkened with something fierce. "Come with me," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Aisha didn't hesitate. He led her inside, through the grand halls of his mansion, but she barely noticed the lavish surroundings. All she saw, all she felt, was him. When they reached his bedroom, he turned to her, his gaze searching hers. "Tell me you want this." Aisha's lips parted. She should have said no. She should have turned away. But instead, she whispered, "Yes." That night, Alexander made love to her with an intensity that left her breathless. He worshipped her body, his lips trailing fire along her skin, his hands exploring her as if memorizing every curve. He whispered her name like a prayer, his voice laced with something more than desire, something deeper. Aisha had never felt this way before, cherished, adored, wanted. And as she lay in his arms afterward, her body still trembling from his touch, she realized something terrifying. She was falling in love with a man she could never truly have. Months passed like a beautiful dream, each moment drawing Aisha and Alexander closer. The once cold, ruthless billionaire had transformed, at least with her. The world still knew him as the powerful CEO, feared and respected, but behind closed doors, Aisha knew a different side of him. He was gentle with her, protective, devoted. He found reasons to steal kisses between meetings, to hold her when no one was watching. He memorized her favorite flowers, the way she loved to dance when she thought no one was looking, the way she laughed when he teased her. And Aisha, she had fallen completely and helplessly, but still doubt lingered in the back of her mind. He was Alexander Knight, and she was just a maid. Surely this was temporary. Surely reality would come crashing down at any moment. But then came the night that changed everything. The grand ballroom of the Knight estate shimmered under the glow of 1,000 chandeliers. The elite of high society gathered, dressed in the finest silks and diamonds, swirling glasses of champagne as they discussed stocks, power, and scandals. Aisha stood at the edge of the room, feeling completely out of place in the elegant midnight blue gown Alexander had gifted her. She had never been to an event like this, had never imagined she would one day stand among billionaires and socialites. But tonight, she wasn't here as a maid. She was his. Alexander had barely left her side, his hand resting possessively at the small of her back, his touch sending shivers through her. "Are you nervous?" he murmured into her ear, his lips brushing her skin. She turned to him, her brown eyes searching his. "Should I be?" His lips curled into a secretive smile. "Not at all." Then, just as the orchestra began to play a slow, haunting melody, Alexander stepped away from her. A hush fell over the room. The music softened, and before Aisha could process what was happening, she saw him. The powerful, untouchable Alexander Knight slowly dropped to one knee. Gasps echoed around them. Aisha's hands flew to her mouth, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Alexander held out a small velvet box, his piercing blue eyes filled with something raw, something vulnerable. "Aisha," he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "From the moment I saw you sleeping in my bed, my world changed. You are the only thing that makes sense in my life. You are my peace, my fire, my everything." A tear slipped down Aisha's cheek, her entire body trembling. "I don't care about status. I don't care about rules. I don't care that you started as my maid, because to me, you are so much more." His voice cracked slightly as he whispered, "Marry me, Aisha." The entire room held its breath. Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the man before her, the billionaire who could have had anyone, who had the world at his feet, and yet He had chosen her. Her lips trembled as she nodded, a choked sob escaping her. Yes, Alex. She dropped to her knees in front of him, cupping his face. 1,000 times, yes. A roar of applause erupted, but Aisha barely heard it. Because the moment he slid the diamond ring onto her finger, the moment he pulled her into a desperate, soul-searing kiss in front of the world, she knew she belonged to him, and he belonged to her forever. The days following their engagement had been nothing short of magical. Aisha had believed, truly believed, that she had found her forever in Alexander, but forever, as she would soon learn, was fragile. It all changed when she arrived. Vanessa Sinclair. She was the definition of perfection, tall, statuesque, with icy blue eyes that held secrets, and lips that curled in amusement whenever she looked at Aisha. Unlike Aisha's warm caramel complexion and natural beauty, Vanessa was polished, pristine. She moved through the halls of Knight Enterprises like she already owned it, her designer heels clicking against the marble floors as she stole glances at Alexander. And Alexander noticed her. At first, it was harmless. Aisha convinced herself that she had nothing to fear. He loves me. He chose me. But soon, things changed. Alexander began coming home late. Their intimate dinners became missed calls and unread texts. The man who had once pulled her into his arms as if she were the only thing that mattered now seemed distant, distracted. Vanessa was always there, always lingering too close to him at events, always whispering in his ear at meetings. And then came the rumors, the headlines. Alexander Knight seen with mysterious new blonde. A future CEO's wife should fit the part. Does Aisha belong? Aisha tried to ignore it. She told herself that love was stronger than manipulation, that Alexander would see through Vanessa's tricks, until the night he came home and shattered her world. Aisha had prepared his favorite dinner, roast lamb with rosemary, just the way he liked it. She had been waiting for him, rehearsing all the things she would say, the way she would remind him of what they had, of how they had fought against the odds to be together. Then the door opened. Alexander stepped inside, looking exhausted, his tie undone, his hair slightly disheveled. But there was something else, something dark in his expression. Aisha's heart clenched. She wiped her hands on a towel and turned to him with a hopeful smile. "Alex, I need to talk to you." Her stomach dropped. The tone of his voice, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, it was all wrong. Still, she forced a laugh, stepping closer. "That's good, because I have so much I want to tell you too. I'm marrying Vanessa." The room spun. Aisha stared at him, her lips parting, but no words came out. A sharp ringing filled her ears, drowning out everything except the deafening sound of her heart breaking. I don't understand," she whispered, her hands trembling. You're already married. You're married to me." Alexander swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "I made a mistake." Aisha flinched as if he had struck her. A mistake? Their love, their passion, the nights they had spent tangled in each other's arms, it had all been a mistake. She shook her head, stepping back. No, Alex, this isn't you. She's manipulating you. She's making you doubt what we have." Alexander's gaze remained cold. "This is what's best for the company, for my image." A tear slipped down her cheek. "And what about me?" Silence. Aisha searched his face, desperate to find the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had promised her forever. But he was gone. And in his place stood a man who had chosen power over love. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "I'm sorry, Aisha." And just like that, he turned and walked away. Aisha crumpled to the floor, silent tears slipping down her face. Her love had been real, but in the end, it hadn't been enough. Vanessa had everything she ever wanted. A billionaire husband, a penthouse suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A wardrobe filled with designer gowns, diamonds wrapped around her slender wrists, and an endless stream of luxury at her fingertips. But love was never part of the deal. Alexander learned that truth far too late. At first, he had convinced himself that he had made the right choice. Vanessa was perfect on paper, a woman who fit seamlessly into high society, who spoke the language of wealth and power with effortless charm. But the illusion shattered quickly. The first few nights of their marriage had been eerily quiet. Gone were the warm embraces, the passionate whispers, the stolen kisses that had once set his soul on fire with Aisha. With Vanessa, there was no laughter, no tenderness. She was distant, her affection as cold as the diamond ring she so proudly flashed at every social event. She wanted the title, the wealth, the prestige. And Alexander, he was nothing more than a means to an end. One evening, as Alexander entered their penthouse, he found Vanessa lounging on their velvet couch, her legs draped elegantly over the armrest. A glass of champagne dangled in her perfectly manicured fingers. "You're late," she murmured without looking at him, flipping through a magazine. He exhaled, loosening his tie. "Long day." She hummed in response, uninterested. "Did you finalize the deal in London?" He frowned. "Vanessa, do you even care how my day was? How I am?" She glanced up, her icy blue eyes narrowing. "I care about what affects our status, Alex." She let out a dry chuckle. "Isn't that why we got married?" His jaw tightened. Was it? Vanessa smirked at his silence and turned back to her magazine. "You should send me to Paris this weekend. I'm getting bored here." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling in his chest. This wasn't a marriage. It was a transaction. Later that night, unable to sleep, Alexander stood by the massive window of their penthouse, staring down at the city lights. A glass of whiskey sat untouched beside him, the ice melting into nothing. His mind was elsewhere, on her, on Aisha. Her laughter, the warmth in her eyes, the way she made him feel alive. He could still remember the way her body fit perfectly against his, the way she whispered his name like it was a prayer. With Aisha, his world had been filled with color. Now, everything was dull, cold, empty. His heart ached with a truth he had been too blind to see before. I threw away the best thing in my life for this, and worst of all, Aisha was gone. Regret was a slow poison. It crept into Alexander's soul, burning through every moment of his empty, hollow existence. No matter how much wealth he accumulated, no matter how many deals he signed, nothing could fill the void Aisha had left behind. He had made the worst mistake of his life, and now he was drowning in it. Vanessa didn't fight him when he filed for divorce. She barely blinked when the papers arrived. The woman who had once clung to his wealth simply shrugged, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. "I suppose I've gotten what I needed out of this marriage," she mused, glancing at her reflection in the mirror. Alexander clenched his jaw. "You never loved me." Vanessa let out a cold laugh, swirling her wineglass. "Of course not, darling." She smirked. "But you knew that, didn't you?" His stomach twisted. Had he known? Had he been so blinded by greed, by pressure, by society's expectations, that he had chosen this life over the one thing that had ever truly mattered? Aisha, the woman he had destroyed. The moment the divorce was finalized, he didn't waste a second. He drove straight to their old home, the small, beautiful house where he and Aisha had spent their happiest days. His heart pounded as he stepped onto the porch, his hands clammy. He had no right to be here, no right to ask for forgiveness. But he had to try. With a shaky breath, he knocked. The door creaked open, and there she was, Aisha. His breath caught in his throat. She was just as breathtaking as he remembered. No, even more so. Her caramel skin glowed under the warm porch light, her deep brown eyes filled with emotions he couldn't quite read. But there was pain, too. So much pain. Her lips parted slightly in shock. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked, "Why are you here, Alexander?" He swallowed hard, emotions clogging his throat. He had rehearsed 1,000 things to say, 1,000 apologies, 1,000 ways to beg for her love. But in the end, all that came out was raw honesty. "I was a fool." His voice cracked. "I lost myself. I lost you." Aisha's hands tightened on the doorframe, her breath unsteady. He took a step closer, desperation in his eyes. "I broke the best thing in my life, Aisha, and I don't deserve it. I don't deserve you." His voice was hoarse, thick with emotion. "But if there's even a sliver of a chance, please give me one more chance." Silence stretched between them. Aisha's lashes fluttered, her expression unreadable. Then finally a single tear slipped down her cheek, and Alexander's heart clenched, because he knew this wasn't going to be easy. Aisha didn't answer immediately. She stood in the doorway, staring at the man who had once been her everything, the man who had broken her heart into a million jagged pieces. Her silence was deafening. Alexander felt it in his bones, in the way his heart pounded with fear. He had expected this. He deserved this. But God, he wasn't ready for the emptiness in her eyes. "Aisha," he whispered, his voice raw, but she shook her head, stepping back. I can't do this right now, Alex." And with that, she gently closed the door. But she hadn't slammed it shut, and that gave him hope. Days turned into weeks. And Alexander, he didn't give up. Every morning he left fresh roses at her doorstep, the deep crimson ones she loved. Every evening he wrote her a letter, poured his soul onto paper, filling pages with the words he had been too blind to say before. "Aisha, I wake up every day regretting the moment I let you go. I would trade every dollar I have just to wake up beside you again, to hear your laughter fill the silence, to hold you the way I should have fought to hold you forever. Please, let me prove that I can be the man you once believed in." He never expected a response, but she read every single letter. Her hands trembled as she held them, her heart warring with her mind. Because despite everything, despite the agony, despite the betrayal, she still loved him. The night everything changed was stormy, the sky a canvas of thunder and sorrow. Aisha curled up on the couch, listening to the heavy rain, the wind howling against the windows. Then a knock, a hesitant, desperate knock. Her heart stuttered. She opened the door, and there he was, Alexander Knight, the ruthless billionaire, the man who had once walked away from her, was now standing in the freezing rain, drenched from head to toe, his blue eyes shining with something painfully real. "I won't leave until you let me in," he murmured, his voice hoarse, trembling. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating his face, his tired eyes, the unshaven stubble, the way his lips pressed together like he was holding back a million emotions. Aisha gripped the doorframe, her heart pounding against her ribs. She could have turned him away. She could have let him suffer, let him drown in the cold, just as he had once left her drowning in pain. But love, real love, doesn't die easily. And despite every scar he had left on her soul, despite every tear she had shed for him, she still wanted him. With a shaky breath, she stepped aside. Wordlessly, Alexander walked into her home, into her warmth, into the chance he never thought he'd get again, into their second chance. Love, once shattered, doesn't heal overnight. Aisha didn't wake up the next morning and suddenly forget the heartbreak. She didn't erase the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the pain of watching the man she loved slip through her fingers like sand. Number the scars remained, but Alexander was a different man now. He was no longer the cold-hearted billionaire who thought love was a luxury he could afford to lose. He wasn't the man who had traded something real for empty glamour. He was broken, humble, and desperately, hopelessly in love with her. Their second chance wasn't a fairy tale. Some days, Aisha still woke up afraid that she would lose him again, afraid that history would repeat itself. But every time she hesitated, every time doubt clouded her heart, Alexander was there, holding her, loving her. "I will spend my life making it up to you," he vowed one evening, his fingers lacing with hers as they sat by the fireplace. "Every single day, every moment, I will remind you that I belong to you." Aisha searched his face, looking for hesitation, for deception. There was none, only devotion, only love. Slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. It was in the way Alexander worshipped her now, his touch no longer casual but reverent, as if he was afraid she would slip away again. It was in the way he kissed her, deep, slow, full of meaning, making up for every lost moment. It was in the nights they spent tangled in each other's arms, where his hands mapped every inch of her skin, where he whispered apologies against her lips, where she finally let herself believe that he was hers again. Passion rekindled, stronger, wilder, deeper than before, because this time Alexander knew he could lose everything, but he would never lose Aisha again. The night air was crisp, the stars above shimmering like tiny diamonds scattered across a velvet sky. Aisha stood on the rooftop of their home, the same place where once upon a time Alexander had first held her hand, first whispered promises of love. Now those same stars bore witness to a love that had been tested, broken, and yet, against all odds, had survived. Alexander stood before her, his blue eyes shining with something she had never seen before, not just love, certainty. "I hurt you," he began, voice thick with emotion. "I broke the one thing I should have protected the most, and if I could go back, if I could change everything, I would." Aisha's breath hitched. The past was a painful place, but here he was, standing in front of her, owning every mistake, every heartbreak. He took a deep breath, and then he dropped to one knee. A gasp escaped her lips. Her heart thundered. "This time I promise you forever," he said, his voice trembling. "Not just words, not just dreams, a real, unbreakable forever." He pulled out a ring. Not extravagant, not dripping in wealth like the first one, but simple, elegant, meaningful. A tear slipped down Aisha's cheek. She had dreamed of this moment once, back when she was naive enough to believe love was easy. Now she knew better. Love wasn't easy, but he was worth it. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Even when I hated you, even when I tried to forget you." She swallowed hard. "My heart never let me." Alexander exhaled shakily, as if he had been holding his breath for a lifetime. She reached down, her fingers trembling as they touched his. "Yes, Alex, yes." Relief, joy, something indescribable flashed in his eyes before he surged up, cupping her face, kissing her deeply, pouring every promise, every regret, every ounce of love into that kiss. The past no longer mattered, the pain no longer defined them. All that mattered was now, and the forever they would build together. Love wasn't about perfection, it wasn't about wealth, beauty, or the empty approval of the world. Alexander had once been blind to this truth. He had chased power, status, and fleeting desires, only to find himself lost, hollow, alone. But Aisha, his Aisha, had taught him what love truly was. It was sacrifice. It was trust. It was choosing someone even when it wasn't easy. And she had chosen him again, despite the scars, despite the past. And he would spend forever proving himself worthy of that choice. Their wedding was nothing like the cold, extravagant one he had once shared with Vanessa. No reporters, no meaningless luxury, just love. The kind that didn't need an audience. As Alexander held Aisha's hands, his heart pounded, his soul aching with gratitude. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, But I swear to God, I will spend my life making sure you never regret choosing me again." Aisha's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling. "You once broke me, Alexander," she admitted, voice raw. "I thought I would never recover. But even through the pain, I couldn't stop loving you, no matter how much I tried." A single tear slipped down his cheek. He had shattered this woman, torn her apart. And yet, here she was, giving him the one thing he never thought he would get again: forgiveness. "You are my home, Alex," she whispered. "You always were." He sucked in a shaky breath, gripping her fingers as if she might slip away again. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel lost again," he vowed. With that, he kissed her, deep, slow, forever. A kiss of redemption, a kiss of promises unbreakable. This time, there would be no betrayal, no mistakes, only the life they had always been meant to have, a love that had been tested, burned, and still survived, a love that was finally forever. A powerful message for society, inspired by this story, Heart 1. Love should never be measured by status. In a world obsessed with wealth and status, true love remains priceless. Aisha and Alexander's story proves that love is not about money, but about connection. Society often separates people based on class, but when two hearts beat as one, no status should stand in the way. 2. Betrayal can shatter even the deepest love. One of the most painful experiences in life is being betrayed by someone you trust. Aisha gave her heart to Alexander, believing in his love, only to be cast aside for a woman society deemed more worthy. This reflects the harsh reality that many face, being replaced, not because of lack of love, but because of society's unfair standards. 3. Beauty is not just skin deep. Vanessa, with her perfect looks and polished charm, symbolized the superficial beauty that the world admires. But true beauty lies in the soul, in kindness, loyalty, and love. Alexander learned the hard way that external beauty fades, but a loving heart remains forever. 4. Money cannot buy love. Alexander married Vanessa, thinking she was the perfect partner. But he quickly realized that money can buy luxury, but not genuine affection. Many people chase financial stability in relationships, but love built on wealth alone is doomed to crumble. 5. The pain of regret is unbearable. Nothing haunts a person more than realizing they lost the one who truly loved them. Alexander had it all, but still felt empty. When he saw the truth about Vanessa, regret consumed him. This teaches us that we should never take real love for granted, or we may live with a regret that can never be erased. 6. True love deserves a second chance. Even after betrayal, Aisha's heart still held love for Alexander. Though deeply wounded, she gave him another chance, not out of weakness, but because real love doesn't disappear overnight. It takes courage to forgive, and an even greater strength to trust again. 7. Society needs to stop judging love. Why does society believe that love should exist only among people of the same status, skin color, or background? Aisha, a maid, and Alexander, a billionaire, proved that love knows no boundaries. It's time to break these barriers and allow love to flourish in its purest form. 8. Women deserve loyalty, not replacement. No woman should ever feel like she is an option. Aisha was loyal, loving, and kind, yet she was abandoned for someone else. Every woman deserves a partner who stands by her side, not someone who replaces her when something new comes along. 9. Apologies mean nothing without change. Words can never undo the pain of betrayal. Alexander's return was not enough. He had to prove himself. Love is not about saying sorry. It's about changing and becoming a better person. Those who hurt their loved ones must understand that forgiveness is earned, not demanded. 10. The strength of a woman's heart is unmatched. Despite everything, Aisha remained strong. She did not beg Alexander to stay. She let him go and faced her heartbreak with grace. This shows the true strength of a woman. She can love deeply, but also survive even the deepest wounds. 11. True love is built on trust, not appearances. Vanessa dazzled Alexander with her beauty, but their marriage lacked trust, care, and warmth. Love is not about how someone looks, but about how they make you feel. If trust is broken, love loses its meaning. 12. A real man knows the value of love. A man who truly loves will never betray, never abandon, and never replace his woman. Alexander had to lose Aisha to realize her worth, but not all men get a second chance. A real man sees the value of love before it's too late. 13. Marriage is not just a contract, it's a commitment. Alexander's second marriage with Vanessa was built on greed and attraction, not love. Marriage is not about signing papers, it's about committing to someone's heart. A true marriage should be built on love, trust, and respect. 14. Forgiveness is a choice, not an obligation. Aisha chose to forgive Alexander, but she didn't have to. People need to understand that forgiveness is given from the heart, not forced. If you hurt someone, you cannot demand their love back. You must prove you deserve it. 15. Love that survives. Hardship is the strongest love. Despite everything, Aisha and Alexander's love endured. They faced betrayal, pain, and heartbreak, but love found a way back to them. A relationship that overcomes storms is stronger than one that never faced hardships. A question for you. Would you give a second chance to someone who once broke your heart? Tell us in the comments.